What makes megachurches so attractive? And why are they more susceptible to abuse and manipulation? In this video, I'll be analysing megachurches from a sociological perspective. And if you're interested in the religious side of sociology, this video is going to be right up your alley. I'll be talking about the growth of megachurches, what makes them attractive, what they are, and also the toxic manipulation that can possibly happen. And as a Christian myself, I've always been fascinated in megachurches. I've definitely attended some of the services, seen the good, the bad, and heard about the ugly, as I'm sure we all have. But researching this from a sociological standpoint was just really, really interesting. And slight trigger warning, we'll be touching on SA and spiritual abuse in chapter 3. So if you want to miss out on this video, take care of yourself. And I'm sure I'll see you in another video soon, but I just wanted to get that out there. Editing Joelle here. Another reason why I wanted to cover this topic that I forgot to mention is that it's part of my channel's mission to show primarily sociology students and aspiring sociology students how to apply theory to the real world. And I'm only scratching the surface of this huge topic. And obviously how I've applied it is specific to my own opinions and experiences. So feel free to comment respectfully below your own opinions on this. But anyway, let's get into the video. Now let's get into what megachurches are and their history. To first understand megachurches, you need to understand what churches, sects, and cults are. In my MLM versus cults video, I went a little bit deeper into this, so check it out in the cards somewhere if you want a more in-depth dive. But here's a quick overview, which is also covered in A-level sociology from theorists like Stark and Bainbridge, Strauch, and Weber. So a church is an organization which accepts the social environment in which it's in, and it's pretty much accepted by society, right? So it's obviously a religious organization, but people don't really question it that much, especially in Western society. But with sects, SECT, they say they're re-establishing an old faith from a branch of a parent organization, which is usually like a church or something. And they claim to be the authentic, purged, refurbished version of the faith from which they split. Sects are more in tension with the society, so they're not as accepted and they don't really accept the social environment in which they're in, but they're not as extreme as cults, which have 3 different kind of main categories. So you have audience cults, client cults, and cult movements, each increasing with intensity and isolation. So cults are new and not an offshoot of previous existing religions as sects are. So they're really easy to get confused, so I just want to put it out there, this is what it means. And so what makes a megachurch a megachurch? A church is a megachurch when it has an unusually large audience, usually over 2,000 attendees every single week. And they usually are Pentecostal, they're not really associated with a certain denomination, i.e. Catholicism or evangelism or whatever else there is. And they often have charismatic leadership, not necessarily just one person, so not really exactly like a cult, but they have charismatic leadership, and that's kind of how they run. And here are some other factors: very active 7-day-a-week congregational communities, so things like small groups, social events, things like that. And they also have social and outreach ministries, so things like going to charities, doing food banks and things. And they have a very complex organizational structure. It's almost very corporate, but with a religious spin to it. Now, I'm not talking about all churches here. A lot of churches obviously have a lot of these aspects, but megachurches are just huge. And some examples of megachurches are, some of the famous ones are Hillsong, Elevation Church, Bethel, City Harvest in Singapore, which has had some controversy, and also HDB in London. So let's get into the meat of the video. What is it that makes megachurches so attractive? Now, there are some reasons here that are going to be more rooted in sociological viewpoints than others, but it's just really interesting to see why they're so popular. The first one is the fragmentation of society. This is a very postmodern theory that society is so fragmented, there's no such thing as community, everyone's an individual, which means that individuals can go and shop and choose bits of churches that they like, which means that a church has to be marketable and attractive, and that's something else that we'll go into that feeds into the growth and rise of megachurches. And with the increase in modernity, churches have become cathedrals of consumption, as Guinness says in this quote, where people are encouraged to view religion as sort of like a marketplace in which competition and choice play a massive part, like I'm saying, and it is basically it is capitalism. It fits right in which goes into the next thing that is a huge factor, which is branding and image. So branding is embedded in what it means to be a part of these megachurches, as Wagner 2014 puts it. The church's branding is integral to their experience of self. So this is not only the members, but also what the world sees from the outside. This is what your church is like. This is your church brand. And as an example, Hillsong Church, which is the church that Wagner actually explored for his thesis, Hillsong Church would be the context in which Christian church members experience their faith. So it's really important how a church brands itself, because this is literally where the faith happens. This is where their beliefs are shaped. And the demographic of megachurches play a part. It varies greatly from megachurch to megachurch, but one demographic that you think of when you think of megachurches is like the young and hip crowd, like the pastor with the leather jacket, tattoos, fedora hats, and flannel shirts, as you can see from this pastor starter pack. And this also depends on the type of church that you're in. So is it like a seeker-orientated church, which basically means that it needs to be relatable to the outside world for it to be attractive for outsiders to come join, whether they're like non-Christians or they're people who have been like burned by previous churches. And something that comes off of this is music, which is also part of their brand building, something which is largely unique to megachurches, I would say, to use music to draw people in. And I'm sure you can think of some churches who produce their own music, and not all megachurches do, but we're talking about the ones that do here. They write, produce, and distribute their own Christian music. Like digital, obviously music is digital these days. You can find it on YouTube, streaming platforms, and in the comments of these videos, you'll see like loads of people from all over the world. So their reach is not to be underestimated. And obviously there are some benefits to being in a megachurch that attract people and help them to grow. Clearly, we're here to critically analyze them, but it wouldn't be fair to just sit here and not present the positives as well. Having such a large organization would mean that financial worries are not as common. Like, you're not going to be worrying about like, oh, can we replace the carpet, or fundraising all the time to repair like pipes or the wall or something, as you would with like an old church with a not very big congregation. You're going to have to fundraise. But with a large congregation, are you going to be financially struggling? Probably not. And Christians who are for megachurches, they'll say that megachurches are really good for bringing people into the faith because they seem more relevant, at least to the world, and they feel a lot more like modern and relatable to young people, which is why a lot of these churches have a thriving younger demographic. And as well as that, benefits of megachurches is that they can run massive social campaigns just because they have the funds and they have the manpower to do so. For example, HTB's Love Your Neighbor campaign, which was a response to the effects of COVID. And this is like a really good example because you can critique what their full motivations are. For example, like PR. You can also question their connections to, for example, like Boris Johnson made an appearance on their Love Your Neighbor Christmas campaign, and personally I thought that was a little bit hypocritical, but I mean, I wouldn't be going into that today because that's like a whole different story about like connections and like elite. But yeah, these are the reasons that have contributed to their growth and continue to do so. I thought that I was right, but I wasn't what you needed. Now let's talk a little bit about the more toxic side of megachurches. Now, trigger warning before this section, there's mention of SA and spiritual abuse here, so skip ahead to this timestamp in this section where you'll skip over the SA bits. Just something to note, this is not something that only happens in megachurches or this kind of organization. This is prevalent everywhere, unfortunately, as we live in a misogynistic system and society. I'm just pointing this out because megachurches might be susceptible to this kind of thing. Abuse comes in many forms, and we're just going to touch on some that exist in megachurches and why they are maybe more susceptible to it. Spiritual abuse is one of them, and it's defined as a form of emotional and psychological abuse. It's characterized by a systematic pattern of coercive and controlling behavior in religious context. Now, this can be within an organization or a personal relationship. And Selena or Omalade Okeyato has many videos talking about the sides of church that not many people talk about. So I'd highly recommend you checking out her channel. And of course, in the BBC documentary about Hillsong, the allegations of SA were outlined along with some interesting footage of the leaders. So I would highly recommend you check that out if you haven't already. As to why megachurches might be more susceptible to this kind of manipulation and is just perhaps the size of it. The larger an organization is, the more complex the organizational chart is in this system that we live in. But yeah, when you have such a top-down organizational chart and when people at the bottom don't really have that much of a say, there's always going to be some sort of friction and problems that are caused by this dissonance between the reality of people at the bottom and the reality of people at the top. Because the organizations are so big and finances are so abundant, there can be things like mishandling and corruption of finances, which we have seen many times. But there's also moral decisions and moral corruptions that happen. I don't know how to say this without mentioning like specific circumstances. I'll link some articles below. But yeah, if you feel like you need resources for recovering from this sort of abuse, then I've included some links in the description for you to check out. Now, another thing that is used for manipulation in megachurches and some churches in general is the message of welcome home and like love bombing. This is something that I become like wary of. When people say welcome home, or they use family, like your family to me, I don't know, I feel like it's a bit weird to use a unit, i.e. a family that is inherently broken in so many ways, to make people feel like they're at home when families can be so, messed up sometimes. And so love bombing is part of that as well. And love bombing is when they make you feel so welcome and loved that you don't notice the control and manipulation that you get afterwards, making you make massive sacrifices, to serve at church, sacrifice your own energy, your time. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people who have had to do that and they've been burnt out and they have to take like a big step back. And lastly, some similarities of a cult that megachurches have, which contributes to being more susceptible to manipulation and that sort of toxic behavior. It can be a very slippery slope into cult-like behavior. And this is often really hard to notice because some things are so normalized, especially when you're inside the church, when you've been brought up in this sort of environment and you think it's just kind of normal, and you do things that deepen your affiliation with them, aka like serve, basically help out with various things like on the day of or in their social campaigns. Something that researchers have said is that as your affiliation deepens through time or effort and therefore pay a higher price for the religious good. And this is how they can really manipulate you and use your desire for like community or your desire for involvement in order to basically use your free labor, which we have seen as well. And of course, there are traits of a cult that you can maybe see in these organizations. So a charismatic leader, mind-altering practices such as like chanting or speaking in tongues, which is a debatable concept, and always preoccupied with making money. Now, this might not always be explicit, but like through tithing or preaching prosperity gospel, this is something that megachurches will do a lot. And they'll also prevent you from thinking critically, because when it's so uplifting, when it's so exciting, when you're in the congregation, you're less likely to think about, the big questions in life, and you're less likely to question what's going on. Because when you stop and think, when you look around you, you're like, wow, this is really cultish. That's what I've thought to myself, not gonna lie. That's just another cult trait that some churches, megachurches in this video specifically, are guilty of. Allegedly, in my opinion. As you can tell from everything that we've discussed about megachurches, a lot of this is like really complex, and I've literally just scratched the surface in what I'm sharing with you today. And the deal isn't as straightforward as people make it out to be. It's not like bad or good, and there's a lot of gray areas, as with anything in life. And people's lives, emotions, and livelihoods are at stake here. So yeah, it's really important to consider like the people who are in these organizations and stories that they're so brave and willing to share. And everything that we've discussed today, added with power dynamics involved, produce like inevitable downfalls that occur within like any organization. So the moral of the story here is that people are flawed. Think critically about who things benefits and whether it aligns with your own beliefs. So have you been involved or experienced anything with megachurches? Like, let me know what your thoughts on this video. As always, stay kind in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
And I hate it that I love you and you hate me 'cause I love you.